what is fascia? Anybody?
I've read once, and I think that's an amazing way to explain it. It's the scaffolding of the body.
Exactly, yeah. So, anybody else? How do you see it?
It's like a web, a net that stretches throughout the entire body, surrounding all of the muscles and organs and bones, that creates a sort of structure that's been ignored for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's exactly that. But the other way of putting it is the fabric of life. So it makes you, and it's quite difficult to wrap your head around it, in as much as you say, well, it makes all of you, but it actually also makes scaffolding for every cell in your body. So it's not just every bit, so everything that's not a cell is fascia. So absolutely everything. So it's quite hard to kind of, and then you're like, well, but I'm not the same. Like, I'm not the same on the surface as I'm on the inside. How does that work? So if you think about fabrics by definition are made out of, what are the fabrics made out of?
Fibers.
Yay! The fibers. I think I've got one of my missing people coming in. Apologize. Could somebody get me to go mine?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So the fibers are collagen and elastin. So if you think of fibers in a fabric, a weave or a combination of fibers will determine how much give that fabric has. Yes? So those of you who genetically have more collagen, which generally makes tissue much stronger, more resilient, will be good at bodybuilding stuff and being strong, but won't be very flexible. Those of you who have more elastin kind of speaks for itself, then those of you who have more elastin, you'll probably find that you can be more flexible, but kind of lacking a bit in strength. And that's kind of the proportion of these things to fibers varies throughout the body depending on what's needed. So, the collagen-elastin ratio in your tendons or your ligaments or around the tissues around your internal organs will vary, depending on how much give you will need. And it makes sense. I mean, in some places the weave will be very messy, like in cotton wool. You can't really see it. Yeah, or felt. I didn't have any felt. But felt is generally how fascia kind of is in places. It doesn't have a specific net. The fascia that encases your muscles, it can start like felt if you don't train them. If you sit on the sofa watching Netflix all the time, it's a bit like this. It's like felt or like cotton wool. But if you start training it, if you start using it in a certain direction, then you develop this double lattice structure which has its own purpose, again, of having a give in certain direction, but not in other direction. Okay? That's quite important to understand because, especially with the double lattice build, because, remind me of that, I'll have to get there first. But partly because if I go to a certain point, there is a give, and then I go past it, what's going to happen? This kind of thing's going to happen. And then when repair starts to happen, you don't repair it like this. You repair it like cotton wool. And then you have to use it again in a certain way to rebuild all of this. And this happens during injuries. Most injuries are fascial injuries anyway, but it also happens during surgery and so on. So there's fibers, and there's also cells. Those cells are not fascial cells, they're made by other cells, but they're specifically, this is confusing part, so I'm not going to kind of go into that, but you can consider those cells like fibroblasts, etc. You don't have to worry about those, but they're the cells that build more of fascial fibers, or they degrade and eat away fascial fibers. And why is it important? It's important because these cells, they can be stimulated, and they're stimulated during stretching to a certain point. They're stimulated by certain chemicals in your blood, like you may have heard of nitric oxide and hydrogen sulfide, but it's just big words for chemicals that promote certain reaction. Oxytocin, if you ever had a baby, you'll know about oxytocin. So the chemicals in the body will stimulate these cells, as well as the stretching. For our purposes, stretching is important. So if I stretch something and I hold it for a while, these cells are gonna go, oh, and I think of them, so if I'm getting a bit too complicated, I think of these cells as slugs. So if you think of slugs, if you've seen slugs crawling around and leave a trail. So it's the same kind of situation. You've got these little slugs crawling around and laying these fibers or these trails in the body that create a weave. Which then, if you don't use that weave stays like cotton wool. If you use it, it has then a nice lattice arrangement in your muscles specifically, or in other places in your body. So the third component is water, and it's bound and unbound water, and you don't need to know much more about that. And then there is this thing, mysterious thing, is known as ground substance. So what is ground substance? It's that glue-like, goo-like, snot-like. So there's all sorts of like complicated names ending in saccharides, and there are all sorts of forms of sugars, and they make this kind of, snot-like. They go snot-like stuff that if you think of a fabric, if you imagine this in this, and kind of encased in snot, you get this kind of like, this kind of stuff. Yeah. So it makes it squishy. It makes it, it lubricates, it hydrates, it also provides a certain amount of support. And as you can imagine, you are not two-dimensional, three-dimensional, so you've got layers upon layers upon layers upon layers of stuff. What do you need between layers? What do you need between it? Glide, yeah, you need some form of, in certain places you need glide. We'll talk about glide later. So, it's got fibers, it's got cells that build fibers, and it's got the gooey stuff. It's got stuff that kind of keeps it sticky together or doesn't keep it sticky together, gives it glide, nutrition, etc. So, in